Several years ago now, about a man who was born blind. It was called At First Sight. I think it was Sandra Bullock and Val Kilmer. About a man who'd been born blind, but a new surgical procedure allowed him to gain his sight again. This woman, Sandra Bullock, convinced him to go for it, thinking all their problems would be solved if he could only see. She didn't realize that a whole new set of problems arise when you can see. If you're suddenly able to see after not being able to, your brain doesn't know how to interpret the signals it's receiving from the eye. You know nothing of color, of depth perception, or anything. You become disoriented and nauseous. You'll fall down. There'll be vertigo. You will probably end up throwing up several times. If that's not enough, you'll probably start freaking out by all the weird things you're seeing. Red, blue, you have no idea what those are. All these scary images in the background, what are those things? They're trees, that's a dog, but it's all new. All unimaginable to you. Imagine never being able to see before and suddenly the world's there. The man in the movie, Val Kilmer, realizes it was easier when he couldn't see. Not necessarily better, but easier. He was used to it. He could imagine the world the way he wanted to. There was no visual evidence that could contradict that. Now that I understand. I understand that. Jesus and his followers move on, but Bart has to make his way home eventually. All his beggar friends have packed up and left. But Bart has never actually seen his way home before. Never even seen his house. The world is still spinning, so all Bart can do is close his eyes, pick up his stick, and find his way home the old way. You might think everything would soon start looking up for Bart. Sure, people are excited he can see now, but now no one lifts a hand to help him. They assume, well, he can see now. He ought to be able to do it himself. Except he's never learned to cook or iron or fix a wagon wheel. He needs money, but who's going to give money to a perfectly healthy beggar? Anybody ever seen the Monty Python movie, Life of Brian? Anybody? Couple back there. Great movie. Well, in this movie, there's a guy named Brian who's kind of followed Jesus, and people think he's Jesus for a while, but he walks into the city. There's a man there, line of people begging. And one guy goes, alms for next leper, alms for next leper, starts following the guy, trying to haggle for money. And he says, well, 1 minute I was a leper with a trade, and then a guy named Jesus comes along, and suddenly I'm cured and have nothing. Who's going to give money to a perfectly healthy beggar? The guy's actually kind of mad about it in the movie. He was a leper with a trade, and now he has nothing. Cured with no livelihood, he says. Bart maybe is in a similar predicament now, chasing people in the town as the ex-leper does, haggling for a bit of change. Because he has no job, he has no farming experience, he has been trained to do nothing. Before Bart was blind, he had sympathy, but now he's expected to get a job. But what can he do? He's not a fisherman, he's not a farmer, he owns no land. What's left for him? Suddenly he's beginning to wonder if he should have asked for his sight unseen. You know, seeing isn't always all it's cracked up to be, especially if you're used to living in the dark. Don't you hate it when you're in your dark bedroom sleeping and you have your peaceful sleep and suddenly your parents come in and flip on the light? What's the first thing you do? Put the covers over your head. You don't want to see yet. It startles you. It's too bright. You were enjoying having your eyes closed in the dark. That light can be shocking. That's the worst part of movies, isn't it? When you leave the movie theater, it's just like walking to your car. Sometimes we'd rather be in the dark about certain things. We were talking about this Friday night at Family Fun Night. Stephanie and her dad were talking about it. There was a point in time when you learn how hot dogs are made and what are in hot dogs. And you can't unknow that. Same thing with baloney. Once you see that, you're done. You what? David says, yeah. You can't some things you just rather be in the dark about. I had a leader when I was in junior high, a youth leader named Drew Darby. He loved him some John Elway. Pam's gone at the moment. She likes John Elway. He loved him some John Elway. He idolized John Elway. He had the giant John Elway coffee table book. When I helped him move to a new apartment, that was the first thing he had to find. Where's the Elway book? Where's the Elway book? But one day, a friend of his was visiting from Denver, who actually kind of knew some stuff about John Elway, and was trying to tell Drew what John Elway was really like, what some of the dark sides of Elway's nature were. You know what Drew did? What he literally did. La 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 la, and ran upstairs and locked himself in his room and refused to come down until there was a promise that no more talk of Elway would be had in that house. He didn't want to see anything else. He wanted to keep the image he had of John Elway. He didn't want his eyes to be open to anything else. Let me keep them closed and let me imagine the way I want to imagine. I understand that. You know, if we face the facts, we have to admit we're all blind. We're spiritually blind. Blind to a lot of corruption in the world, blind to so many's pain, blind to hunger, blind to death, blind to atrocities and cruelty. Sure, we could ask to see, but then we would see. We would see the genocide. We would see the torture, corruption, cruelty, the acts of violence and war that are going on across the world for what they really are. And chances are our brains would not be able to handle that information. It would probably disorient us. We would probably become nauseous, and if we really saw a lot of it, we would probably end up throwing up. If we were suddenly able to see, we'd have to see the bondage people are still in across the world. We'd have to see the numbers of children actually trafficked through this country into sex slavery. We'd have to see that. We have to see the horrible conditions of sweatshops where underpaid women and children make the very shirts and pants we wear. We have to see the slavery stitched into the fabric of our clothes. We'd see that. If we were suddenly able to see, we'd see the people on the corners with kids begging. We'd have to see the small one-room home that 3 or 4 families live in. I still remember when I was a kid, our Sunday school bought presents for a family, kind of like we're doing. My mom asked me if I would like to donate anything, and I surprised her and brought a good chunk of money that I'd been saving and bought this kid a big wheel, and I went with them to donate with my mom. A small broken down house. So many people living there, windows were broken out. I still remember the kid who the big wheel was for and what he looked like. I remember asking my mom, how many people live there? How can they survive that? That image is burned in my mind. As a kid, I couldn't understand it. Why do we get to live in this big house and they live there? I didn't understand. But that image is still burned in my mind. If we're able to see, we'll see all that. We'll see the children's feet blistered and cut who don't have the right shoes to wear. If we're suddenly able to see, we see we're not as good and holy as we'd like to be. We see our devotion to the Lord as temperate at best. We pray when we feel like it or when something is wrong. We follow the Lord's commandments when they happen to fit with our lifestyles and judgment. If we're suddenly able to see, we'll see that the world is a much darker place than we thought it was while we were living in the dark. We see that our own hearts and minds are often darker than we ever thought. If we're suddenly able to see, we'd see so much. And we might just want to close our eyes and make our way home like we used to. I'm not going to stand up here and inform you deeper on ethnic genocides or serious human rights issues across the world. I'm not going to read statistics on poverty and all those things, because you can find them. They're all out there if you want to know. You can flip on the news, jump on the internet if you want to. But that's the issue, isn't it? It's all there for you to see. If you want to see. And that's